I felt like I was standing on that back porch with him to a certain extent, to be honest with you. It was an experience rather than just watching a video. I remember standing there as I listened to the footage and watched the footage, and Jim just happened to be out there. He had no idea what was going on, and that was very obvious. And he started actually getting, the thing is, it was actually happening, and we saw the second plane come in, and I got to hear Jim's reaction to when the second plane came in. But even then, at that point, it was still just footage I had seen. But as the thing went on, I just kind of got captured by the heart that was in it, and I realized that this could have been me saying the same thing. For instance, I remember one time he swung the camera over and he looked at the rail tracks off in the distance.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And he says, God, look at this. He said something like, it's just like the earth stands still. Everything stopped. And it just kind of put you in a kind of a spellbound moment there. And then I think I told Jim one of the most touching parts that I remember. He was just thinking like any American would while he was watching this thing. He swung the camera down. There was a little graveyard down there.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And it looked like probably an old military graveyard, like
yep.
a lot of old graves,
Mm-hmm.
And I remember him saying, God, I wonder what these guys would think. And he just stood there and he paused, and I could just feel what he was thinking. And it was like, and he wasn't making the production. That's the difference. That's what touched me about the whole thing. I mean, you've seen footage, but it's just hard to explain. You're seeing the 9/11. You're witnessing it. It's just like you're there yourself.
Well, everything that we've seen for the most part has always been overvoiced or doctored or kind of cleaned up with narratives that are scripted. But this thing, and we've almost seen little clips of what happened from other people who are reacting as they're videoing it. But in this situation, it stays 2 hours.
Exactly.
And
I was just spellbound. Yeah. I couldn't turn it off. And then I watched it again when it ended.
What I want to ask you too, because for me, I take it for granted, having lived across the way from there for like 40 years, and so I knew the lay of the land more or less. Not that this is a big thing, and not that you've not been up to New York City, don't know that you had, but with the way he was shooting it, it kind of gave you an idea of what was going on across the way, and actually kind of contrasted to the placid nature of what was still taking place in New Jersey. But, I mean, did you get kind of a sense of the way everything was laid out? We all saw maps and all this other stuff. But this gave you a pretty good idea to fix yourself and how everything was laid out more or less geographically. Was that of any kind of interest to you at all?
Exactly. I've never been to New York City. And, he's over here in an apartment across the river. And I had a better understanding after watching that film of what people were seeing and how they felt and what was going on than anything I had seen on any of the news footage. It was just almost amazing. You just can't see what he captured in news footage.
Mm-hmm.
Because he wasn't trying to impress anybody. He was just, I don't know, I was listening to what was coming from his heart while he was shooting the camera, and I almost got to the point that when he would turn the camera, I could almost feel what he was going to say. It was I remember one time he looked around and he looked at the apartments beside him.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And there was nobody out there. And he said something like, "Where's everybody at?" You'd think the whole city would be out here standing on these things looking. It was just like all this was happening, and the city was at a standstill, and nobody even knew it.
It was almost like when you throw a rock in a body of water, and you see how the concentric rings come out, and it takes a while to get back to you on shore. And the one thing I thought about when I looked at the video, and as he had said it, he kept panning down to whether it's the viaduct on the turnpike leading to the tunnels, whether it was people walking the street. When he did the pans to left and right, nobody seemed to be at their windows.
Right.
It almost like it took time, despite this era of electronic communications, It took time for what you would call the reverberations, the concentric rings, to come out from the trade towers and finally make their way into everyone's life over in New Jersey.
Exactly. That's well put. That's exactly the way I felt it. It was like a mystifying time. It's hard to explain. It's just something I told Jim I just felt like everybody should see. Yeah, I think the news footage isn't enough. I thought it was enough till I saw what he did.
Right.
You know,
No.
Everybody needs to see this thing. They really do.
And as I had told Jim, and I'm going to throw it back to you, Jim, in a second, when you remark during, and I had made notes and a log for everything that took place, and you make a remark about the first jet coming in, the fighter jets, right?
Yes.
And what was interesting was you made remarks about that. That was the only thing, that sound, that I picked up on that made me believe something was wrong somewhere. Only because where I was, I could not see the sky because, again, it was early September and the tree-lined streets wouldn't let me see past the canopies, over my head. But I heard this thunderous noise and I'm going, oh man. My thought was that there was a passenger jet in trouble and was going to try to land at Teterboro, if you know where that is, right?
Yes.
And I'm like, gee, this is not good. And I'm standing in the middle of the street, and I stood still and looked up. And I'm like, does anybody think this is weird? And I looked down 2 blocks to the south of me, and there's a guy in the middle of the street doing the same thing. I'm like, oh, this isn't good. So I thought maybe I might hear something of a near, tragedy with a plane trying to land that couldn't make it perhaps to Newark or whatever. And that's the only inkling I had that something was very not right. In the Northeast. Other than that, I had no clue until 2:30. But you remark about that when the first jets come through, and that's when I knew, that's what happened. I didn't even have a watch. I had no idea what time it was. But with the video and you hearing the same thing I heard maybe a second beforehand, but you knew why they were there. I had no clue. Danny, I also want to ask you this too. I mean, let's face it, I don't believe that the video in any way, shape, or form was gratuitous with violence or anything like that. He had no idea what was going to happen, but I think we're all impacted. I think everybody to the core of their soul is impacted when he starts to move in on the towers, and there is debris flying out and stuff that's floating, around. But then you see certain objects that are dropping straight down, and you know exactly what that is. Did that have any kind of impact on you?
It did. And Jim even commented there, I think he didn't know what that was at first, and then all of a sudden, I think everybody that sees a thing, it starts to dawn on them. You know what I mean? I mean, it just hits home. It really does. I don't know, he captured something there that I hadn't seen in any other footage. And it's, like I say, it's not the best footage that I've seen of the planes hitting the thing or anything else, but it's just different. When you watch his little amateur clips, I mean the amateur film, it's 1,000 times more powerful than all the big news footage I saw. It's hard to explain. I just thought it was fabulous. I really did.
Yeah.
It's a shame that really hasn't been shared. And I know Jim, he had no idea what was going on, and I wondered at first, is this for real? But after I watched it, I knew it was just like I was standing there watching, and he had the same kind of reactions I would have had, and I think his heart went to places that his mind took him, just
right.
like mine would have, and like any American. I mean,
well, he makes some observations.
Exactly.
That I probably would not have, but I'll never know, although I kind of doubt it, because I don't know why, and I'm going to let him answer for himself, but when you hear his questions, his dialogue, I mean, this is not in any way, shape, or form rigged or, fabricated. This is just somebody wondering, okay, what is going to happen next? Unlike yourself, An might have known it somewhat, although he was probably a little more protected as I was. We couldn't go through the whole thing. We didn't know if there was going to be something else. But you and watching the TV as you did that day, and obviously Jim, doing the video on it. That's got to be something. I guess I'm glad I was spared, because now all these questions go through your mind. You're wondering if this is the end of the world as we know it. Blah blah blah. And I were probably spared from that. Danny, you got a chance to watch it on TV, and of course Jim was right there. So Jim, let me ask you also. I mean, there's language in this. Let people understand that. That's okay. Whether or not you were Christian at that time, fine. I don't think anybody really could be, held to the fire about the way that they used adjectives and adverbs that day. And you were talking out loud. Let me ask you something. Now there were two gentlemen that you went to visit, right? One is Hussein. Was there another guy there?
Yes. The other. Well, there were a couple other people that would come and go. The same with Hussein. The other gentleman, friend of mine, his name is Shiva, and
right.
He's an East Indian gentleman. East Indian American.
Right.
And he comes and he's actually you see him, actually in the beginning, and then I take that back. When he's gone, that's it. He's part of the account, but you see when he leaves from that gathering in the morning before the first strike, he's on his way to work, and he then called us from a cell phone and said, look, it looks like a Cessna or something, smacked into the World Trade Center. And, that's why, when I went out there on the fire escape, I was like, what is this?
Right.
Like a Cessna, what? No.
Well, when you were making comments then, when you were talking while it was happening, not that there had to be somebody there, because I probably would have done it even if there wasn't, just because you knew it was being picked up as you were, shooting it. Were you talking to them at the same time, or were you just basically giving a narrative as best you could? There was no one there, and I mentioned to you, Keith, I don't know if it's just, I'll let everyone know. The reason why I was up there, my wife, believed that as well as I thought, that I was I had a lot of talent potentially I could make a living as an actor. So I went to one of the better schools in Manhattan and da-da-da. But what I'm saying is there were a lot of times that I would work on roles where I would actually be working with soliloquies. I was accustomed to working that way, and it's just part of me. When I was actually, I think that came into play. A lot of that was in there, and it felt natural to me, even though it wasn't affected. It wasn't affected, but that's just how I expressed myself, and I was able to do that. Would it be fair to say, and I think I picked this up, and Danny and Anna probably have their own ideas about it, although you might be so close to it, I don't know if you can remember. To me, it's very fresh, and so I would say to you that there was a point at which you were freaked, and you're just trying to catch everything in, and then after the second tower hits, now, again, you get this resurgence of being freaked out, but at a certain point, and I think especially after you got the call into your wife, which is also on the audio there, and are hoping that she comes home and is safe, it seems like, in a sense, you had to steel yourself and settle down because there's something else that might happen. And then you got, I think, a bit more concerted and organized about what you were going to shoot. Would that be a fair assessment, or?
I think so. I think everything. I know that everything that was happening was at in a way that I wasn't having to think about it. But that I would say that your assessment is right on. There was a sobering up. You know what I mean? If I could put it that way, I really was looking for something else entering into that airspace, and thinking about my wife there. I was two minds. I'm looking at what's happening. I know what's going on there in front of me, but my wife is there too. She's, I can see where she's at, and I'm like, I'm seeing that thing, that iconic, the Empire State Building. It's there, and I'm like, what? Is this going to be the next,
exactly.
target?
Right.
So I'm of two minds there, and it was. If that had something to do with that, me, steeling myself up at that. I think you're right, though, Keith. Yes.
We're going to go around for last comments, if we could, as we draw close to the hour. We're going to run a little over. That's okay. But what I want to do is I want to first throw it to On. We'll end up with you, Dan. You get the last shot. But